Let's talk about where you just were. You were just in Los Angeles, Milken Institute. You were mentioning to me in the green room that ordinarily when you've gone up there and there's been a session of academics or people in the higher education realm, you'd be shunted off to a slightly smaller conference room.
30 people.
Yeah, a small array of chairs. Not this time. Huge
Bigger
place.
than this.
Because everyone is curious right now about what's the future. Are questions that are being asked by the current administration questions or accusations? What does the feel of the pullback of federal funding mean? Assess any of those in whatever order you prefer.
So I think we are in a really difficult situation right now. And that was the first question at this meeting. Jeff Silingo was the moderator. And what I said is I think people in the administration have conflated the social compact we had, the universities, with society, with the administration, with the governments, with research funding. And I think there's ways to inject a little bit of more observance of Title VI, Title IX, and a bunch of various laws and force the issue without conflating or without using the funding as a stick. And the reason for me is the following. The funding really impacts everybody. So for example, Pell Grants. They impact lower socioeconomic status kids who go to all sorts of institutions. They go to Harvard, they go to UC San Diego, and they go to Point Loma Nazarene, they go to USD, they go everywhere, right? So that's for general good of the population. Now connecting that to some institution violating some Title VI or Title IX issues, I think is problematic. I mean, the institutions have to be forced to follow the law. And I think higher education has gone a little bit astray over the last 20, 30, 40 years. We've become a little bit too full of ourselves, and we need to take our social responsibility. Our responsibility is really focusing on our mission and not just opining on everything that's going on out there. And I think that's the problem. So I don't know if I'm making sense to you, but higher education clearly has made mistakes, and they need to be told how not to make those mistakes anymore. But cutting the funding is an extreme way of doing it.
And what are the downstream effects? I've had lots of conversations in Washington with people in Boston and other places who say, look, federal research funding is something that the commercial sector won't do. It will get discovery to a certain point,
right,
and then the commercial entities will take it from that certain point and bring it to full flower.
Right.
And they're a tandem process, one then the other. But if you cut off the first, it's impossible to get to the second.
Right, so if you look at, for example, research funding, the whole landscape of research funding in the country, 55% of the research funding, 55% is the federal funding. The rest is philanthropy, it is private industry, it is everybody else. So about half is federal, so it's not like the feds are funding everything. But why is then federal funding so significant? I think it is so significant because of when they fund. They are the highest risk reduction mechanism. So they fund ideas that may not ever work. They fund ideas that could become the Google, but we don't know that going in. So the risk going in is extremely high. So when you and I invest in a company, we're looking at how much the risk in making this investment. The feds are taking the risk. The society, you all of us who are taxpayers, are taking the risk and mitigating the risk. That's why that money is so important. It's not the 55%. It is what it does, how much risk it reduces.
When you talked about the waywardness, things getting askew in universities, are you talking about private and public, or mostly private?
It's actually across the board. I think all institutions, I mean, look, here's my notion. So if you ask me, like, what is an ideal institution, or what's an ideal graduate, right? So an ideal institution would be, for me, a place where we are able to graduate somebody who can hold like 10 different hypotheses in their head, conflicting hypotheses, opposing each other, supporting each other, not supporting each other, right? Argue in their head and come back with some rational decision, some basis for saying, I support hypothesis 3. Now that to me, where you have to have multiple pieces of information that don't support each other. You may not like the information, but you don't get triggered by information. I think what has happened here is that we get triggered too easily, and ways of thinking about what is obviously the right answer and what's obviously the wrong answer. And I think that's problematic. And universities, by their very nature, are progressive, but to believe that every progressive idea is the only right idea is actually a mistake. And that's what the conservatives in the country are fighting right now. Does that make sense?
Sure, I get it. I want to tell you a story about Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, like Cleveland, like Detroit, like Akron, like a lot of industrialized cities in the 70s, was highly stressed and suffering something akin to an economic and cultural collapse. And Pittsburgh rebounded more rapidly than any of the other cities I mentioned, farther ahead of them now, because in the mid-70s, the mayor, the head of the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, the biggest two banks in the city, and the medical center had a lunch every week. And at that lunch, they said, we are going to start planning the future of Pittsburgh that is not industrial-based. It may be partially industrial-based, but we have to plot a future and understand it's going to take 30 years to realize in totality. Nobody told them to do it. There wasn't a vote on it. There wasn't a referendum. They did it themselves. And what happened over time in Pittsburgh is that luncheon became a thing. And people who wanted to participate in Pittsburgh's future got wind of it and began to ask for invites. And from that very small microscopic thing, the universities, the businesses, and the political leadership imagined and created a new Pittsburgh. What do you see the role of UCSD in San Diego's future, thinking of that as not only a real-life model, but one that could work here and what is, I believe, already working?
So I think that was already happening in San Diego. What you're talking about Pittsburgh in the 60s and 70s was happening in San Diego because of UC San Diego State, USD, Point Loma Nazarene. I think San Diego is kind of fortunate because we have only, okay, I'm going to say something. I would have been correct like a year ago, but I'm not correct right now. The big dog research university is UC San Diego. San Diego State also is a research university, don't get me wrong. So I just want to make sure that I'm being respectful out here. But it's the only city where there's one mega research university. Seattle is the other city. Very few cities that are really enabled by universities have one big university. So we are fortunate where UC San Diego is really the big dog and really in many, many ways, fueling the economy, starting with Qualcomm and even before that, into biotech industry. So we are proud of what we do. So UC San Diego is playing the role of both what Pitt and CMU would do,
right?
If I were to put it bluntly.
Sure. You have
Grant was there, so we
about 43,000 students enrolled.
46,000.
46,000. You have one of the largest student housing programs in the country here.
We have the second largest housing program in the country.
Why is it a priority on campus? How have you been able to figure it out? What's the model for the rest of the country?
So I think if you think about expanding access, so you could be a commuter school and then tuition becomes the only limitation to access. But we are not a commuter school. So the only way to expand access is to really provide high quality education at an affordable price. And if you look at the components, housing in San Diego is more than 50%. It's more like 60 or 70% of the cost of education. The tuition at UC San Diego is only $15,000. You cannot live in $15,000 for 9 months. I can guarantee you that. Nobody can live, right? So it's about $20,000 or more. So when I saw this, I felt that we had to build housing. We had the land. Secondly, if we build housing, commercial, like if we were to build housing and market to market, nobody would be able to afford it. And given that the land was given to us by the feds, by the city, by the county, by the state, so our land is a gift from multiple people. All of you have contributed in giving us the land. My view was, I'm going to give that back to the community. So in any housing development now, 20 to 30% of the cost is the land cost when you build like large structures. So I said, okay, we will build housing and we'll make it like at least 20%. Our housing is more like 30% below market, and make it completely affordable. So that's where we are. And I honestly think that living experience on campus is a much better education than just commuter education.
Is it a competitive advantage for students as they're assessing where they're going to go?
I think it is. Look, quality of education is clearly the criteria number one. And even there, we are like the top 5 in the country. In the UC system, I think we are at the top, if not the top, at the very top in the echelon of quality of education. You add to that housing, and you throw in the ocean, and you're sleeping while you're watching the ocean. I don't know who's going to compete with us.
Right.
So I'm waiting to, in like 3 more years, we're building a new 6,000 bed village out here. And that's going to be amazing. It's going to be completely activated. And it's 3 or 4 more years. And then after that, I think there's going to be, then I'm going to see how we compete with some of the best in the country.